contractors and done some other work in highway. And then once we get that money back in, we'll be able to then replenish those funds. So you'll see those being restored. Then we'll have some additional monies that'll come in that will be money that had been spent on things like overtime and some of the other administrative support, which is eligible for reimbursement. Those monies will be new revenue in the new budget year. We've already been, it was an expense, so we'll see what we can do with that. So when it's all said and done, there will be some additional cash flow from that. We just don't have a real good sense of when that's going to happen.
So at the moment, we're just tapping into our fund balance to cover all those costs.
We're just covering it through the operating budget, and if we're over on an account line, we'll ultimately have to cover that too.
Yeah.
We're not doing too badly in the current year, so.
Yeah, but our current year's kind of completed because of that 500,000.
It's gonna reflect sooner or later,
Yeah.
right?
So have those expenses all been paid at this point?
All the contractors have been paid, all the gravel that we've hauled, all those, the restoration of the roads. And the state actually charged us for the use of some of their vehicles, so everybody's been paid. So the expenses have all been recognized. Once we get the project worksheets approved from FEMA, we'll go through that process and I can give you a real number.
So we're gonna get any mitigation. I know we've been talking about mitigation because we got culverts on that, especially on Leach Road.
Mitigation is a separate number outside of what's already been done, right?
Okay.
So then we're gonna meet with them and try to get some additional monies and some projects, and that's definitely something we want to do, is resize some of those culverts.
Okay.
So.
Okay, page 14 under development. The planning, the downtown planning expense. Is that for something in regard to a grant or something, or?
That was. Catch up to you. Oh. Yeah, Gary, you want to explain that? Because that was the joint.
So the planning commission and the development office are sharing some reporting project. When we were looking at the economic development chapter and for the new town plan, the planning commission really wanted to see some current, robust economic data in an annual report type format that would be useful for decision making and looking at. And so in previous years, the planning commission had used $10,000 for other items. So they asked if we could split it to $5,000 economic development and $5,000 planning and do that type of economic data in an annual report. And I think that Alyssa took it out of the development fund from downtown planning and put it into the economic development in the general fund.
I know it showed up two different places there, but I haven't run across it yet. Page 20, Meeting House Fund. There's nothing there. I assume that's waiting. We're waiting on the result of the vote on town meeting.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yep.
And unsafe building reserve. We're not going to do that to 50. You're going to leave it at 40.
Well, that's what was in the last item that was the original article that we've been using. It started at 40. So if the board wants to change it to 50, we can, and we just went back to the original. So it's up, certainly that's an item that you can extend. It just, we went back to the original.
How about bridge reserve?
I was going to there too, but good thing you picked that up. 'Cause I don't know if there's one item there that says reserves for 100,000. Is that where you dump that into, Scott?
Where are you looking at, Peter?
I'm still going ahead.
Okay.
Trying to find out the page number so you guys can find it here.
Yeah, and not put additional monies into the bridge reserve for the proposed budget. Some of that being that we're out an additional 18 to 24 months now based on the construction schedule for that project. So that was a concern that I know we want to build that up over time. And we're still trying to figure out where we're going to be with the project itself in terms of how much money they're actually going to be asking for us. I keep asking VHB if they can come back and give us a 60% plan set update, and they're not ready yet. So I really want the board to be able to see that, understand in more detail, more than the schematics that we looked at with the parking lot, some of the other issues that were kind of critical, some of the turning radiuses, some of the sidewalk impacts, and make sure, as well as the placement of the pedestrian bridge. So there's some critical items that I think was important enough to have them come back and do just an updated presentation before they go to a final design. I think the board wants to make sure that we're all on the same page. VHB's been good. They've just been a little bit, takes them a while to get through their design process.
Yeah, and I think we can, once we get a sense with the finances, how everything irons out, we will know, have a better sense of our fund balance, and we can always move money from
Yes.
the fund balance into that particular. Instead of hitting, right now, we'll be hitting the taxpayers. up front.
Correct.
If we can,
It seemed a little premature to do that, but
Yeah.
certainly if that's the board's interest, we could certainly do that.
I think I'd rather wait till we figure out what happens with FEMA, and, I mean, there will be ideally some funds available in our fund
Yes,
balance.
there definitely is.
So, Scott, I was looking at what I would consider dramatic increases in some accounts. And one of them is software on page 9, toward the third one up from the bottom. There's a blank under the budgeted. It was $2,500 in FY21, and it's going to be 6 times that in the next year. What's that about?
Town clerk.
Most of that relates to required state licensing. There's also we also have a state, we're required to run a registration program for all of our vehicles with the state. That's going to have some licensing and software because they've changed that program. So some of that money is included in there. A lot of it is land use and records from Kathleen's renewals. That's also in there. I think there was one other one that had changed from the previous year to that, to
I think
this
it was
budget.
software that was making it easier for people to see online the records, right? Wasn't there an increase in that?
Correct.
Yeah.
So all of those basically, Rick, are all state-wide program requirements. That these aren't anything that we're doing, unique. It's just part of that
Okay.
process.
Are those one-time fees for the license?
Most of those are just because of changes and updates. So
Yeah.
they should go back to a regular, normal pattern
Right.
once you get through that update.
On page 11, the fuel number that's staying the same, and given the increase of cost of fuel, I'm wondering if that's an accurate number.
We worked on that with Andy a little bit, and the reality of it is that changes really based on what we're doing in relationship to just our winter activities and just our general, how active the trucks are through the course of the year. So
How much fuel? is
we
used?
looked at it and we decided the cost of fuel is going up, but it didn't go up enough to where we thought that was going to dramatically impact what we're doing.
Okay.
So I think we're fairly comfortable with that number. If we see another 20 or 30% increase, then I think we'll all be able to get uncomfortable with that number.
Yeah.
But I don't hope, at least hopefully we won't see that as we get into the spring. So
Yeah, but this I think is heating fuel.
Okay.
The town hall heating.
Looks like you
fuel.
got an electrical problem somewhere.
So.
Okay, let's increase that budget.
that was about the fuel. That was a warning.
Now, on page 12, Scott, and we talked about this a little bit, that the labor at the recycling center has gone up by 60% in 1 year, from 60,000, at least from 76 to 96. And the question is are we over staff. And my gauge of that is when I pull in there and I see if there's a line or not. But the only thing that affects the line are the two people in the recycling. That's the, I never see lines in the scales or in the trash disposal. So I'm wondering, is there any way we could reduce that number? It's a pretty whopping increase.
Well, some of that is, I sent an email to Rick and said, some of that is we had to upgrade our pay because we just had another increase in minimum wage. So that's reflecting those changes.
Right.
We were paying below that rate. The other factor in that is, I think, when we had less staff, we had certainly a much more, the grounds were not as well maintained or not as pleasant because we just didn't have enough staff to watch what was happening. So we were ending up with piles. We're ending up with, at various points in time, we're ending up with people stacked up into the street on the Route 5.
But
So,
weren't a lot of the people volunteers?
well, there's a combination of that, plus there was quite a bit of picking activity and just sort of, it wasn't processing people as much as it was sort of stopping the process. And that really created some backlogs. So I think Rick's point is well taken. I'm not disputing that there's been increases. I think the question is, what's the trade-off? And you know, again, it's the board's pleasure. Peter spends a lot of time down there. I don't spend as much time down there, but I certainly know that we have to staff certain places just because of, unfortunately, if there aren't eyes out and people wandering and making or challenging, we end up with all sorts of problems
I
down there.
think you better hit no up there. It wants to reboot.
Oh, goodness gracious, no. Now is not a good time.
We gotta run it now.
Yeah.
So Peter, what's your take on that question?
I hemmed and hawed about that, but, having been down there, of course, they're short one man now anyway, so what's happening is the two people that were running the garbage disposal, now one of them is generally running in and running the scales.
Okay.
The problem I have with that is that if you don't have two people on both sides of that rubbish disposal, where money is being or payment is being taken,
Yep.
somebody could just drive up, throw bags in there and drive off, and you don't see anything happen over there, because you only got one person. The one person on one side of that machine cannot see what's going on the other side, and you're
Yep.
not gonna want them walking around the other side to throw tickets in, because then the line starts to form up.
Yep.
And I know the last couple of days, because of the holiday closure, when you get down there first thing in the morning, they were lined right up to the gate, both sides, right to the recycling. The
Yep.
recycling, you don't have to worry so much because you're not dealing with funds there, or
Right.
fine, making sure people are paying for the disposal. I mean, I make it a habit, if I don't see them throw a ticket in, maybe they may get a little hot under the collar, but I always ask them, you guys pay for that?
Right.
The other problem is that a lot of people will come in and they drive right around and start throwing trash in the dumpsters. You don't know if they've been on the scale or what, so sometimes you have to run over there and ask them. Did you weigh this material, or did you weigh some of them don't, they weigh and they drive off, so you're constantly on the watch down there, you just can't turn your back. I hate to say it, but that's how it works. I haven't been down there for as long as I have working. It's a turkey shoot.
You know it better than anyone. And the single stream recycling from, is that Casella? That's gonna go up by, it looks by almost, gonna double from $25,000 to 50.
Well, look at the actuals, which is really more realistic. We are just getting more and more materials. So we really adjusted the budget to reflect the reality of what's coming through the gates.
So that 56 is what has been spent year to date or all of
That was
last
the
year?
prior year's actual.
Okay.
That was the real expense from fiscal year 21's operation.
If you look at the financials when we get to them, you'll see that within 7 months, we're running ahead a little bit. So I think within the next 5 months, by the time June 30th rolls around, you're gonna find that you're gonna be pretty much even with expenses versus what we expired. The only thing that's gonna kill us is transportation. That's, I think it's like 45,000 are in there.
where they're hauling this stuff away, and that's a problem.
And
I don't know
the
how
real
you're gonna
issue-
cure that, other than, you
Well,
know,
there's
I
a
mean,
fuel
we have to pay it, we
surcharge.
gotta get rid of it, so.
If there's a big spike in expenses for fuel, there is a surcharge built into their contracts, and they can
So,
charge us more money.
I mean, Scott's making some inroads on the food scrap, so we found, he's got a handle on somebody else to take that, that's gonna be less expensive, so.
Beautiful, that's good,
We probably aren't gonna have to be charging for that,
Yeah.
as we had talked about, but
that's great.
it's, you know, it's. You gotta, you can't, you know, if you're down there constantly for about a month, you know, that's when you gotta watch, because that's when it gets crazy.
All right, one last question, I think, is the, Scott, you mentioned the workers' comp, we've had some fairly
We've got large claims.
stark increase in the claims.
Right.
Now, is that reflected in this on page 16? Looks like it's only increased by $6,000 from the actual.
No, it's in the highway department, I think.
I was looking for that.
Showing up-
It's on the
showing up.
highway department. They have a separate line for workers' comp in the highway department.
Yes.
They
You know
do.
where that, where is that?
It's in your benefit, in the benefit section. I questioned that last time, because it's really up and a big jump there, because, you know, the accidents we've had and stuff, and I don't know, it's a lack of training, or Scott said they do it, but, you know, I don't know. I
Well, a
haven't
couple
talked
of them
to them.
have been just surgical, and when you have people out on long-term surgeries like that, it just, the numbers start to add up.
Oh, so it's not related to an injury that happened while they were working?
Some of them are repetitive motion. We've had some shoulders, we've had some other things. A couple of them were accidents, but most of it was related to more repetitive motion. And when you have longer term employees, unfortunately, that's part of one of the downsides of the job is sometimes there are injuries.
And is training the answer, do you think, Scott, or what would be or do you think it's just the luck of the job if it's whoever happens to get hurt? Is there any?
We have all of the lifting assists and all of the right equipment for stuff. A couple times it's just been as simple as, you know, somebody was changing a plow and, you know, just wrenched their shoulder.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's kind of what ends up being a problem.
I think you said, we've got a sort of an aging workforce and
Hmm.
they're more inclined to just wear out something, you know, like
That's true.
needing to.
You gotta think too, if they're in a hurry, and, you know, sometimes you don't think when you're hurry, that's when you get hurt.
Exactly. That's so
So-
true. Okay, those are all my.
Yep.
Anyone else for?
Well, I just had a question on sort of the finance. It didn't look like those wages went up. It's 60 last year, 60 this year. Should there at least be a 2% increase on that line?
Well, there's been a little bit of a change because where we hired the current finance director and where the previous finance director was, there's been a little bit of a budget sort of adjustment for that. So I think overall we'll be okay
Yeah.
with where we are.
And none of this includes the money for the solar array, right?
Yeah, we asked, I asked the auditors if I could do something with that, and they said, really, it's not a good practice, they don't recommend it, so when it comes, I'll let you know. And then if we wanted to put it in a specific place, we could, for a specific use, a designated use. Right now, it's really just undesignated. We'll be able to
Right, so,
target whatever you,
so we're gonna have, what was it, like 50?
it's 50 for the
50.
initial.
We're gonna have 50 more than all this
Correct.
shows, for sure.
Yeah.
Plus the FEMA money.
Right. The only other thing I wanted to point out to you is on the social services agencies, and I think it was more in the warning. You remember last year, there was a concern that the light project number was wrong. They had asked for, their traditional ask was 5,000, and the board had always satisfied that, but for some reason, it had been put in at 2,500.
Mhm.
So I adjusted that back to 5,000 for this year. So if you see that history and wonder what happened, it really isn't an increase. It was just repairing a previous error.
And is the VNA number determined by how much service is rendered, or is that just an annual contract to make them available?
That's really an ask. They come to us with just a general support request.
It's so much larger than everyone but the senior center.
Okay,
Under
anybody else?
Expense, website support, 15,000. What is that? Is that one time or is that?
We're still not sure yet on the new Spectrum system, how much of that is going to be a ongoing expense, because a lot of it's related to volume. And then how many transactions are processed for various events. So really for us, we've only had Spectrix in place since November, and since November, we've only had one small live event. So we just extrapolated a number to see if it makes sense.
It's the online ticketing.
Right. So I just don't know, Elijah, until we get a good 6 months worth of use and a couple of, significant live events to see how that's going to work.
Wasn't that purchase funded by the
The initial investment was purchased through SVOG monies. Well, $144,000 of theater operation was supported through SVOG, was not supported through taxes. Another 72,000 extra will be supported through SVOG.
Wow. That's
So,
a lifesaver.
it's keeping the theater viable at this point.
We've got a big event coming in March, we hope.
Yeah. Well, let's keep our fingers crossed and hope that people will want to come out of their houses.
I just have, well, I mean, I could discuss it now or later, but when we go over the warning, but this truck, the dump truck.
Yes.
I mean, I know we took 75,000 out of the equipment fund. I mean, I don't know, I just wonder if we should just put it in the regular budget, because we haven't bonded for highway equipment before. I mean, not bonded, we haven't put in a request for the voters for highway equipment before, It's always been just in the budget.
Right.
And then using some of the fund balance to cover balance of that, so at least, well, we'd have to, it would be 150, really. I don't know what the board thinks about that, but, or if it's something that we think if it doesn't pass, we can find the money post FEMA, money coming in, and you can purchase it.
I think, right,
Another
I think my thought there, Sue, was if we would go to the voters with that specific item and say, listen, this is part of what we do with our snow operations, and if people feel that it's, a burden on them, then I think if we fail in town meeting, then I think I would, when we get closer to that point in the spring, I would come back to the board and say, this is where we stand with our current operation, here's where we are with FEMA, here's where we are with fund balance. And I'd make that recommendation, so I think the board could make that decision. So we would have a second chance, I think, to do something with that purchase.
So you're saying that what she's suggesting is a good idea?
Yeah.
No.
No, she's saying, leave it the way it is on the town
Right.
meeting warning and let the voters decide whether they want to buy the truck or not.
Oh, okay.
Then
I
if
see,
that
I see.
fails,
Yeah,
then we go to where,
Okay.
now we'll find the money someplace, either with the FEMA reimbursement or some other additional.
yeah, I had backwards.
fund balance.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes,
so
I think there's a second chance to come
I
back.
think we should let it go to the voters.
Yeah, I mean, either way, it's gonna hit,
Either
it's
way,
gonna hit the taxes.
Yeah, because you're looking between that and the railroad station.
It's just as opposed to,
225,000, that's 4 cents on the tax rate, so,
right.
Really that much, wow.
well, 50,000 a penny, that's what it costs, so. Doesn't take long to add it up.
Okay,
So that's why when you use your fund balance, that's where you're trying to figure out how desperate you are to pass those 2 articles, and do you want to increase the use of the fund balance to 300, or leave it at 2 or 150 or whatever. If those 2 articles pass, and you're putting 4.5 cents, 4.25 cents on the 4.5 after the 2.5 onto the tax rate.
so we will reformulate the tax rate depending on how the votes go.
Oh, yeah, those are, that's get added to what we adopt tonight. So.
Yeah, I mean, because we don't set the tax rates, what, July
Yeah,
1st.
because you don't know, you have to wait a lot of, all the articles pass and, or fail or whatever. Then you adjust the
Yeah,
tax.
try
You
to
have to
throw-
adopt an estimated tax rate but that could change and people know that's gonna change. If they don't vote for, the truck or the railroad station, then what we've got on the paper will suffice for the tax rate. And we don't know where the schools come from, that's the state's deal, so.
And, the grand list could change. too. So
Yeah.
There's a lot of factors on the actual tax rate.
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. Okay, we all set with beating up the budget?
Right,
Okay, now let's look at the other three scenarios for the proposed tax rate, and they involve how much money we want to spend out of the fund balance for the highway. And basically what we're doing is there would be offsetting the paving costs. If you go back to last year's town report, you'll see that's how we did it. We take, ask the voters to approve the use of $100,000 fund balance to offset the paving.
And-
Then that actually reduces the tax rate, so.
And how, right now, our fund balance, our general fund balance is pretty healthy. How confident are we post audit that that's gonna stay around that range?
Except for that other item that we've talked about, everything else, I think we're pretty confident. There are no other surprises or other concerns. And
But that other item is general fund, or that hits the highway fund balance?
that one's gonna hit the, my understanding is it's gonna hit the general fund.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's a couple
as it's
of-
currently proposed. And again, I'm just waiting for the auditors to give us the
Okay.
okay on that before we do the transfers.
So, where are we with looking at the fund balance there? Where's
We're at like,
the highway?
highway is, well, until we get FEMA money back, it's pretty.
Yeah, it'll be right up there, but we won't know if we're gonna get that until, look, I'm just looking at the fund balances,
So you go back to that, to the budget.
because that's it. The highway fund is what, I guess,
706 roughly.
998,
Yeah, plus the current, that's right.
so we could take, 300 out of that if we wanted to. That just reduced the tax rate further from that 0.3%. By another 2 cents, so we'll be below, but then if those other articles pass, we're gonna be 2 cents to 4. So,
But we don't have to take this out of, we can just take this out of the general fund balance, which is more, even though it might be used towards paving, to reduce our tax rate, we could take it out of the general fund.
Yeah, you could.
I just worry about the highway fund, because until we get that 500,000 back, I mean, it's, the fund balance right now is down to almost 300,000, and we have 5 months left to go. Unless I'm reading that wrong. Our current fund balance. Not the combination.
Well, that's actually a net add to the current, to the fund balance. So what I think what it's saying is that we're actually trending positively. If you look at the year-to-year numbers. Right, the previous year was 706, and with the current year additional, we're up to actually 998 when you look at the total.
That's the fund balance. That's
That's-
not
that's the whole.
including what we haven't expended yet.
Right, that's just the snapshot according to the period 7 budget status report. So not everything, right, is ultimately reflected there.
If you look at the general fund, you're on at 732, so,
Right.
Right.
so you got a couple $100,000 in the other one.
You could take it, if you felt more comfortable, you could target it to the general fund to be perfectly fine. That's what you're.
Yeah,
And
only 'cause I worry-
understand the concern.
I worry about another $500,000 event.
Yeah, I would hate
Which
to
could
have a
happen.
big spring rain and have to get
Yeah.
out.
It could easily happen.
Oh.
And we also, I worry about depleting the highway fund too much.
Yeah.
To have, I mean, because we've been lucky both with Irene and with this, that we've had money in that. To
It
be able
makes-
to wait for FEMA to pay off,
Right.
which takes a good year and a half.
It can
for 2
take
years.
9 months to a year to get money.
Okay, so you're trying to take the money out of general fund.
I
then.
think the general fund seems to be a little bit more above that 20% that we want. I didn't do the calculation, but it looks like it's above the 20%.
I think you're still comfortably above.
Yeah,
Well,
So if the 500,000 comes from FEMA,
Well, then we're good.
what, will you put that back in the general fund or?
No,
No.
go to highway.
That'll go in the highway
You
too.
put it in the highway fund, but then you'd have a healthy balance to look at for a variety of other options. If you needed to buy your truck, for example, you'd have more than enough money to do that. If there were other options that you wanted to pursue, you'd have the ability to use that money.
For the highway.
In that case, yeah, it'd be specific. It could be towards paving. It could be lots of different options with that.
Could you take it and buy the train station thing?
I think that'd be a stretch to take highway money. and
Yeah.
buy a train station.
But I'm just trying to see how this works out.
Transportation.
I realize it's
This is why we're
transportation.
playing with the amount of fund balance.
Well, I know, and I'm.
I would
trying
have to ask the
understand.
auditors honestly for an opinion on that. I'm not so sure what, my guess is they wouldn't be real thrilled with that, but we could certainly ask if you would like me to.
So you could take money out of the general fund and give it to highway, but you can't go back the other way. Is that right?
Well, we're just using this to reduce our tax burden.
I know-
correct.
Yeah, I understand. I'm just trying to understand. these
Highway's a little
funds.
more.
Highway
targeted.
funds are highway funds, and
Correct.
general funds, general funds.
Yeah.
Highway funds have to stay in highway funds, you can't, you know.
Right, you
Yeah.
can't move it around. All right, that's, it's
Yeah.
just, it's an important thing to understand.
Yeah.
Oh,
No,
100%.
Read the statute.
Now,
It's
now,
just
100%.
complicated.
how about the ARPA money, Scott? What is the plan? I know we have, there's a, Gary, later in the meeting, don't you have?
Right, we have a whole public process laid out for ARPA.
Right.
And so I think it's a little premature for us to target that for actual expenditure. I think it's probably going to be something, once we're done with our prioritization and rankings, then it's going to come back. I think, what is it, May, I think, to get reported back out to you. Really, that'll probably start driving your discussions for what projects you might want to use that to offset for your next year's budget, that next. So it will give you some relief, because obviously that will give you monies to do things that you might not have been able to do through taxes.
How about the bridge projects down here? Would that ARPA money be, for the
They will
pedestrian?
not let
the
us use
pedestrian-
the federal money to do a local share offset on federal projects.
Sorry, I didn't get that. We
They
can't.
will not let us use the ARPA money to do a local offset for federal projects. So,
And one related question, the local agreement, is that where we offer a tax incentive to a local company? Is that what that is? What is the local
No, it's,
agreement?
that's any of the, tax abatements and stuff, you have to cover that, that's, anytime you get a tax abatement, they're gonna make it up in the tax rate, so that's where that comes in.
Okay, so we're projecting to grant $33,000 in abatements.
I think that's we're pretty close to that if we've already abated anyway, so.
A lot of that is the veteran abatement stuff,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
And again, those are just, you look at historical, you just sort of give it.
Yeah.
It's not based on a real number. I couldn't tell you it's for, 30 different things, or.
Yeah.
It's more based on historical.
Well, I mean, for me, if it keeps us within that 20% that we need to keep in our general fund balance, I would go for the 200,000, only because, we lost a lot of staff, but we tax people for the cost of those staff over time. That money, I think, should go back to the taxpayers.
Well, I agree with you,
So-
it's just a matter of,
But if we stay within that safe fund balance.
yeah,
Right.
And once our previous finance director is not costing us any more money, so the
Right.
expense, that was a fairly well-paid position. I think. So we have a more junior person in that role now. Has that saved us some funds or not?
Well, she certainly is, it's a different, right, she came in at a different salary,
Mhm.
so there is some offset there.
Okay.
okay, what am I bid, folks?
All right,
I like Susan.
So wait, let me make sure I understand here. I don't want to be such a pain in the neck, but I want to understand. So if we go for taking 200,000 from the fund balance, does this include the train station and
It has nothing to do with transit.
They'll still show up as an article.
they're still there? So we wouldn't be able to keep the tax rate as it says on the sheet you gave us. It would go up if those things are approved.
Right,
Depending upon what's approved, there would be an increase.
it would be higher than this, okay.
But the more you keep it down, the more incentive there is for them to approve it.
Well, I got you.
Right.
So the trick is to get it down far, the tax rate down far enough so that if they do pass, you're able
You're
to
not,
absorb it.
you're not,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's why Sue was suggesting maybe 300,000, if that isn't gonna put too much of it in. That would get us down a little further than that.
Should we do 250?
I'm not sure
The
the purchase
310.
would qualify.
I mean, really, we should be between 20 and 25% of, I mean, the auditors change, I don't know what your auditors are currently saying. 20 to 25% of operating. Well, they say 3 months
20% is the
now.
max that they recommend, 10% is the
Yeah.
minimum.
I thought they said 15 to 20. 'cause we were
Right, so most of the
running up on it.
time, if you're
We've been
above
at
20,
20 to
they start
25.
to, they start to say you really need to reduce your.
Yeah.
You're taking too much money. You need
Right,
to
I mean, we
spend
don't
it
know-
on a project or reduce your tax rate for it.
Exactly, and the taxpayers have already paid that money. It's their money
Yeah.
that we're holding on to.
100%.
Mhm.
Which
We
is-
should give it back.
Yeah, so we'll just, I
So
think that's.
should
gonna-
we do 250? Or it's between-
I think if they could calculate, I mean, it would be, I don't know, I didn't do the math on the fund balance to see which is the number, whether 200 is fine or 250 pushes us too close to that 20%, I don't know.
I could go back and do, I didn't do it off the top of my head, so I don't want to give you guys a number. We can do that.
But, and also, I don't want to get too close to that either, because there's still some unknowns.
Right.
Until our audit's complete. So I think even just leaving it at 200,000, which I
You will
think is
see a
comfortable.
reduction, right, and it will show up as a reduction.
Yeah.
at The 200,
And that's a comfortable number, I think,
yes.
with all of our unknowns. That's still. a
I feel
comfortable
good
number.
about that, yes.
Yeah, okay. So I would stick with that, I think.
Okay,
Close
so-
to
Just
it.
another question, and I don't know if this, I might be thinking this completely wrong, but if we, the more of the fund balance that we put in to offset the tax, bring down the tax rate next year, is that potentially going to lead to a larger, more distinct tax hike?
It could.
Depends.
Well, the balance to that, a lot of times, Elijah, is our long-term debt, and that's
Yeah.
really what we try to balance, and I think part of the conversations that I've been trying to have with the fire departments is they have some large expenses. Some of our debt is falling off, but they are looking at acquisition of equipment and potentially, some other things, and when you start to look at that, that's where the balancing occurs. One of these pumper trucks is $400,000 or $500,000, just for an example. So I think that's where the board and I think the conversations with these, as we go through the fire equipment committee process and we start looking at major investments in fire services, I think that's going to be part of that conversation, because that does have an impact on, it doesn't smooth your tax rate. It ends up creating these larger jumps.
Can that ARPA money be used for that stuff?
ARPA is really targeted not so much to that. It is in terms of if I wanted to give all the firefighters a bonus, they can do that. I've seen that, but, it's
Can't buy a
actually-
truck though,
but they don't want you to buy a truck. I could buy filters or PPE or those types of things, but it's very targeted.
But yeah, that is a problem. I mean, that's why we usually be fairly careful with using the fund balance.
Right.
But I think it's because we've had this, people have seen the reduction in the staff, but they're not seeing the reduction of expenses in their taxes.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I think we need to kind of balance that out.
And some of that offset is too, you've invested a lot more money in pay.
Yes.
And I think to be fair, when somebody criticizes the board, I think that's one of the responses that I would say to people is, we historically spent, what, $350,000 to $400,000 a year roughly in pay. And now we've increased that the last 3 years to 700, and then last year, I think we spent almost 750. I think this next budget year, we're proposing 850. So, and every time I pave a road, people are happy.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that's
I mean, so
basically-
there's a flip to that, to that.
that's the most expensive thing we do.
what we do. I mean, the town
Yes,
is
it's-
administrative is paying for, is bringing the money in to do the do the paving, basically, and that's it.
Yeah.
It's
I
a
mean,
big
there's other
number.
town
The whole
functions, that's not the
budget.
only thing.
It's a big number.
Unbelievable.
Economic development. but
No, it's definitely a big number.
it's huge.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
It makes you understand why they say sprawling out in the city center is not necessarily good for your municipality.
Highways are expensive. They're expensive to build and
Right.
expensive to maintain. It's just,
And then when it rains too hard, they fall apart.
well, that's a whole nother discussion.
Okay, so where are we going with this, folks?
Do we need a motion or are we ready to make a
We
motion?
don't need a motion, we just gotta give Scott.
You just gotta give me some sense because I have to do, right now the warning's in draft, but at your next meeting, we gotta adopt it. So I just want to
Right.
get a sense of where the board is so I can finalize it, put it into a format. And then we'll adopt it at your January 16th meeting.
Susan's made a very good case for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think if, but only if those numbers make sense. If it's getting us too close to the edge, it makes me nervous. So
Well, what,
We
what do
wanna
you
have
call
a-
the edge? Where do you want to keep it?
I want to make sure it's
I'll run the
actually
ratios
20 or
and
even higher, just
Right.
because we have these unanswered questions.
I'll have the ratios for you guys so that you can see it where we are with the percentages. If you want to take the 200,000 as a proposal out of the general fund balance.
Otherwise, then I would go down to the 150. That, if
Okay.
it's getting uncomfortable, I would go down to 150.
That sounds good to me.
Okay,
I think it really makes sense.
okay. I'll update for that.
Okay.
And then the other thing is on the warning itself, and again, this is a draft because I know it's a little, there's some typos Peter pointed out to me. I gotta clean up a few things. But the one thing was that I didn't do and wanted to bring to the board's attention is the question of the cannabis article. And it's more a question of the language is somewhat straight from the VLCT. So
Right.
that doesn't really change. It's a question of where do we want it? Do you want it as an article before we get into some people have put it at the beginning of their articles, before they get into the financial articles. Other people have put it at the end when they're done with all of the specific articles that have expenditures. So in this case, that's article, go all the way down to Article 14. I just don't know where you want it. So,
I kind of think it should be first because I think there's probably a lot of people that don't want to rack their brains on this budget stuff, but really would like to participate in discussion about cannabis. So it might be helpful to the public to have it first.
if it's first, it certainly has a different impact, obviously, than if it's at the end of a.
Some
So,
people might say, oh, they voted that in, well, I had gone to bed, I was so long talking about that, I was so bad about that.
Well, I would say 5.
I was just saying, you want to sneak it in between where 5 is and.
Yeah, 'cause the
yeah,
first one
so,
we don't
so the
discuss.
new Article 5 would be the cannabis article, is that what you're?
Yeah.
Okay,
So are we gonna put 2 articles in there, one for the
so that was my second question.
integrated or one for the retail or just do the one?
Well, I spent some time on the phone with VLCT this afternoon. And they, this guy said that the complexity of the getting yourself licensed as an integrated operation involves a state bureaucracy that's not yet clearly established. Cannabis sales could begin next May, next October, yeah. But the CCB is still making rules and defining things. He suggested that the first one is the simplest and will confuse people the least. And he said, if you're trying to keep the corporatos from taking over the market, the second one doesn't do that.
It doesn't?
No. That's what he said. Because it's so hard, like if a mom and pop want to open a store here, getting themselves certified as integrated can take months. And they don't even know how that process is going to work yet. And that, in the meantime, nothing could happen. So his recommendation was to do the simple one. The first one, shall the town allow for cannabis retail?
But I thought you could
do both.
do both, and if the second one, if integrated is already down, according to that guy that I was talking to in Jamaica,
Yeah,
that kind of protects the local grower, the local person.
So
If you put it on there and people say no to it,
I see. Okay, so we can have both. You think having both will confuse people?
I think so.
it probably will unless there's.
It's
an-
hard to explain. It's
Yeah,
not,
it's
it's
really
not,
not.
it's not real smooth on the explanation.
No,
I think people are gonna say,
What the hell's that?
right,
yeah, what's the difference between the two? And then you got to try to
right.
explain
Is my
that.
neighbor gonna put a greenhouse full of cannabis up on his property,
Right.
and call himself an integrated grower? So I think it's people nervous sometimes.
That's what this guy from VLCT said. He said that, and also, you're not sure with the second one, because they haven't established all the protocols for defining.
Exactly what
integrated grower.
integrated grower is.
Then that
yeah.
could be months before, or who knows when they would get around to defining it. So my suggestion is that we do the simple first one.
So did you ask him what happened, or if we say yes to the first one,
Mhm.
what's the licensing process? I mean, or they haven't set that up yet, right?
They apply, the individuals apply, or people who want to open this apply to the CCB. They have to be approved by the CCB before they can open in our town.
But they don't have to have an integrated license.
No.
I think the integrated portion, as Rick is discussing, is gonna grow with time and get more detailed and probably, you're not gonna miss, if you wait and do it on another annual meeting, I don't think there's any real significance to that.
You think you're gonna get a second chance at that issue?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You could vote on the integrated later.
Yes.
And the tax question is, I talked to Jeanette White, and the House, who named Jan Ensel, who's the Speaker of the House, she's the one who insists that all the money go to the state. The Senate wants to split it more equitably, and most of the rest of the House does. But this woman's chair of Ways and Means Committee just said that she wants all the money to go to the state, and that's what happened. Now they're trying to fix it. Whether they'll get around to that this season or not, I mean, this session is a good question. But I would like, because Peter's brought up the question, well, what's in it for the town financially? Really good point. It's unclear until this bill is considered how much we'll get. Right now, we just get what, $100 licensing fees.
Yeah,
That's- yeah.
up to $100.
So I think people will probably want to ask that question when it's discussed. And the decision we made by Australian ballot the next day. It has to be done by Australian ballot.
Yeah.
The law says.
Okay, so if we put it on the warrant and it's voted yes, except with by the voters, then where are we? We're just still waiting for them to determine the licensing procedure?
They have to have that squared away. I think it's,
By July, I believe.
yeah, that's what I thought.
Right.
Yeah, the state, the CCB has to have has to begin issuing the licenses, because a lot of towns approved it last March.
Mhm.
There's somebody in the waiting room. Alyssa is actually.
Okay. I think it's Alyssa.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so I say we put the first option in as number 5.
So I'll redraft this for Article 5.
And then should Article 6 mention the library? So not clear what that is.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, you have to,
Yeah.
just put them to fund the library. Then we go down to Article 12. What that indicates to me is that we're gonna vote whether we want to go Australian ballot again for all articles. I don't know if we want to do what Athens did. Everything but the budget is voted Australian, the budget in there, because if they want to change anything on the budget, you gotta vote it down, then we gotta go through the whole process again and have another vote. Just for the budget. So I don't know if we want to reword that article to read that, that we adopt the budget at town meeting and all other articles about Australian ballot. And that, includes officers, the board members, they get elected by Australian ballot. The only thing that gets adopted at the town meeting the day before the vote would be the budget. Like it was before.
That's what it used to be, right? Yeah.
So would you
Because
also,
right now, if there's anything, if somebody is
Right.
mad at the YMCA because the building's gone
Right.
and they want to cut that, then
The
too
whole budget
bad.
has
It's
to
in
be.
there, you can't cut it. You
Yeah.
can't, you've got to vote the budget down to change it.
Yeah, that's
So you
crazy.
can't, you know, so then
so
we
you
go.
saying for 11 and 12 feet or just 12?
What's that?
Because
Yeah, 12.
the library then would be Australian ballot, but then
Yeah.
the town would be town meeting home.
Right. So I don't know how we might want to word that a little differently because it's,
That's not this year, they're talking about next year.
For next year.
The,
We didn't vote on that last year. I thought we did.
we voted to vote everything Australian ballot.
Right.
So that's why we're going to do it this year. If we vote,
You have the option to continue on this year to continue it into next year, and you can rescind it if we're into.
so then if you,
So that's COVID rules.
so, you know, if you vote this year to adopt it, the town budget at town meeting, then next year, it won't affect this year's vote, but it'll vote next year. So,
But
but-
this year's vote is not Australian. ballot.
right, it's Australian ballot.
It is Australian. ballot.
Yeah.
We're still under
Yes.
COVID.
That's a rule that they made in response to.
Yep.
Right, yeah, no, but I guess I thought we had voted to change it last year officially, but we didn't.
We voted to change it to Australian ballot, everything.
This is just a continuation of that.
So this year, we're just trying to, I'm just suggesting we break the town budget out and everything else is on.
So for 24, if I'm going to change this, then we're going to say for 24, we're just going to do adopt the budget at town meeting and anything else by October.
Right,
the BCLT guy was talking to you, they said, and I wasn't paying attention because I was talking to the canvas, but he said the Senate voted today something to do with Australian ballots for the towns. He said something is going to change as a vote taken today. I'm sorry I wasn't paying attention. I'm sorry, I'm so
Well,
vague.
I think they were giving a lot of people the ability to move town meetings in March, like they did last year, to move them into May.
And mailing ballots is another thing. They Act 60 of 221 gives towns the opportunity to request the ballots. Sorry, I'm so vague, but tomorrow I can find out from them. It's funny talking about it.
okay. Let's move right now. So I will change that letter, I just typed up the report, I'll report of the board, I'll just change that around to just take off the highway portion of the unfunded, like, you're using the fund balance, I'll just take it up. Just leave it as fund balance. Yeah. Everybody all set with that?
Yeah.
Report?
Yep, that's good.
This is the report that you wrote for all the select board report.
Yeah.
I was wondering if we could begin with a little positive, like stuff we've accomplished.
Well, that's in there.
Is it?
There's
Like
something like that.
the solar field, is that in there?
I didn't bring up the
Sorry.
solar field. I didn't put that in there, but
I think it's a pretty significant accomplishment. You know, it was recommended by the Conservation Commission, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's, you know, $50,000.
put it in
What do
there,
you
that's
got?
why it's a draft.
What do you got?
Yeah, I think it's fine. Put it-
I mean, you know,
And then the other stuff about we mentioned the names of our new finance person, our new.
already, that's in there.
Is it in there?
Yeah.
Good. All right.
And maybe say something about, having reached a decision to go ahead with the off alignment Deeper Street Bridge. Maybe gonna have major impact on the future.
Yeah. Start saving your pennies.
I don't know, I'll put that in there yet. Maybe we gotta wait, as Scott said, the closer we get to the hangman's noose, we put it in at that point.
You might be out of office by then.
Okay, so I'll change that and send out another edition, so we have it ready for our meeting on the 18th. Okay, we've gone over the draft warning, so let's go to the grant proposal for underrepresented communities. Mr. Fox, I guess you can take the lead on this one.
Actually, Walter Wallace, the Historic Preservation Coordinator.
Excuse me, Walt, didn't mean to offend you by leaving you out, but.
He snuck in behind us, Peter.
All right.
I'm gonna pass this
It's a
around.
good place to sit. We have new
Yeah.
technology since your last year, Walt. These owls will automatically capture your
They're hooting at us
We
early.
have the technology not available before.
I don't know if it's better, but it's here.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for affording me this opportunity. Can you hear me with my mask on?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'll try to boom in an FM voice. This is a grant opportunity that has been made available to CLG towns and cities and municipalities all over the country. It's specifically geared for helping to support National Registry nominations for sites, historic sites related to underrepresented communities, such as African American communities and Indigenous peoples communities, Native American communities. There have been some conversations over time about the so-called petroglyph site in how it sits on the National Registry. Conversations within the Abenaki community, conversations with the Historic Preservation Commission, and in more recent times, conversations between the two entities, between the town and the Abenaki. There is some interest at this point on the part of the State Historic Preservation Office. In fact, we've been very supportive in helping us move this proposal along to make an ask on and to submit a proposal to get the funding so that we can review and update the current National Registry posting that we have for the petroglyph site, which currently is in this kind of very odd place. It's not really, it's on the National Registry by way of being a contributing site for a multi-purpose area that the National Park Service no longer recognizes as a good way to present historic sites for the National Registry. This will give us an opportunity to clarify and to set the record straight as to where it sits on the National Registry and bring in the native voice, if you will, the Indigenous voice, to help us better interpret and understand the context of the landscape of petroglyphs, what they represent. Not as simply a curiosity, which is the way that's kind of presented right now in the National Registry, but to put it in a much larger context, much larger landscape. We now know, for example, from the time when the original National Registry nomination was made back between 1988 and 1990, that much of the focus was specifically on the carvings here in Bellows Falls, just below the Vilas Bridge. However, subsequent research has discovered that it's actually part of a much larger landscape, it goes beyond that simple space. And so this will give us an opportunity to rewrite that nomination so that we can capture the fullness of that historic landscape. What I presented, what I hope folks may have had a chance to look at is in your packet, you had some information outlining in a simple summary where I've taken the various elements of the narrative that's in the draft proposal to give you a good snapshot. I think it's a good snapshot of what the proposal is about and where it's going. Also information about the grant program itself from the National Park Service. And hot off the press just this afternoon, I started working up the preliminary budget, which I hope is circulated a bit earlier by hand this evening to lay out. We're looking for a grant that will have a major, that will have a bottom line ultimately of about $44,500. 38,600 of that comes from the grant. The other $6,000 is a match cost share that is based on the volunteer services of a number of people who would be engaged in the project that we would not have to either the town pays or the federal share. So that's kind of an overview. Thoughts, questions,
Yeah, I guess
concerns, hopefully no complaints.
the final result of this.
Yep.
Is gonna be a written document?
Yes, yes, the project is projected to be a 24-month-long project that will engage 2 program coordinators who would be a historian and an archaeologist who would spend time in the course of probably 18 months of that 24-month period sifting through existing research, exploring new avenues of research, and at the end to develop a new national registry nomination. The end product and the purpose for the grant from the NPS point of view, the end product is a new nomination or an amended nomination. We'll make that determination as the project goes along. Do we amend what we currently have,
Right.
or do we come up with a whole new one?
I just, it sounds like a very worthwhile endeavor. What advantage do we have by getting this amended or revised registration? I mean,
Well-
does that affect other potential grants we might? Because this doesn't do anything to cut down the bushes that obscure, this doesn't do anything like that.
Right.
But if we do this, will that put us in a better position to get assistance for actually doing something with the site?
Well, I think what it does is it does honor some of the objectives, some of the goals that have been articulated in things like the Bellows Falls Island Improvement Plan from
Right.
2013. From the town plan, it makes reference to the development of greater awareness, engagement educationally and culturally. And I think it also, so from that point of view, I think it does contribute to, if you will, the awareness and the potential for helping to better understand and be able to attract people to a very interesting, I've come to understand a very interesting landscape with the heart and mind of the Appomattox community. I think it also really brings together communities that I think have had conversations. But I think just in the last few months, I have a sense that there's been more of a conversation to talk about a sense of place between the indigenous community and the Euro-American community here. I know there's some interest on the part of the Trails Committee, for example, to have a greater awareness and to look at the petroglyph site.
Well, I think anything we could do that would make us more advantageously poised to get some funding from some other source, any source, anywhere, to do something. I mean, and you know, I'm involved deeply with the Historical Society, so this is part of that, you know.
Yeah.
And
I think it goes beyond just, getting funding to do something with the site. I mean, it really, I think anything that we consider with that has to be not so much in terms of just improving as a tourist site, but as recognizing it as something that's important to the indigenous community, really not just, developing it as, to be more accessible necessarily, but it's more about what the indigenous community wants to do with the site. And it seems like from what I'm seeing here, that this would be a better written narrative of the indigenous involvement in the Great Falls area than what we've had previously.
oh, yeah,
So,
definitely, you know.
I think
Somebody
it seems
crossed
like a
some
good
rocks here, we
first
don't know
step.
why, or who, but anyway, that's about
It seems
all we
like a good
got.
first step and better, better representation, of
How will
that community that's still alive.
Yeah.
How will we select the people who represent the indigenous community? I mean, it's Rich Holswich and all these different folks out there. Is there a process by which, I mean, someone who will speak for Rockingham or someone who Rockingham's indigenous population, or will we speak for the whole Wyndham County? How is
The intention, and this is why it's over a 24-month period of time, and as we want to make sure that there's sufficient time to engage Abenaki tribes and bands, not only in our community, but in the region as well. And to try to bring and to foster a conversation and to capture, there's a whole oral history element, for example, to this, where the way that the project is currently conceived, the administrative architecture is such that Rich Holshoe, Gail Golick would be the co-manager. I would be the program administrator, doing the interim reports and the interface with the National Park Service and the SHPO. But those two folks would be committed to work within just not the Elder tribe, but also to do outreach to the other tribes and bands, not only in Vermont, but also in New Hampshire. I think that one of the current narrative is that here are the petroglyphs, they're in Vermont, they're interested. Very I-it kind of a relationship, but also I-thou relationship, I think is what I heard Rich make mention in one of our meetings. If I can give a shout out too, just so that folks are aware, this is something that I've certainly been getting a great deal of support from Gary on. It's coming out of our office, but the group that came together to put this grant together includes Rich Holshoe, Gail Golick, Diana Jones, who's now a commissioner for the on the HPC, Annette Spalding. In fact, Annette Spalding was one of the people I think who would be doing some of underwater archaeology to help support, and that's part of Match is her volunteering that time. And also Chief Roger Longtoe and Linda Longtoe. We did have one major meeting, and then we've been working Google Workspaces and having telephone conversations. But over the past 3 weeks, 4 weeks, as we've been working on this project, it's really kind of a collective effort with folks who are prepared and see the absolute critical need to reach out to a much larger community.
And to follow up on Bonnie's question, this will have no impact on the accessibility of the site to the public.
Correct. Correct.
It's gonna be a written document, an expansion and exploration
Correct.
of, the cultural significance of history, and that's it.
But all of that can be used by others to
Exactly.
create educational things.
Yeah.
You could do and again, it would be up to the indigenous community because they want to protect that site as well. You
Right,
have to
they
be
don't
careful
necessarily want
how
a
they
lot of
want
people
to
down
have it. It should be
Right.
up to them how that should be used, not up to us.
So you would be developing what would turn out to be a research paper, basically,
Yeah,
right?
that's what a well-done National Registry, the National Historic Registry nomination document is currently conceived is really a research document, much more than what they have in the past, which is one of the challenges right now, the way that SHPO, the way that the Vermont State Office, Historic Preservation Office, the way that they look at it is that, well, it has a place in the National Registry, but not really, it's kind of a contributing site here, but it's not really, it does not really represent the fullness of what the place is
Right.
from a historical, from an archaeological point of view as well.
It seems like it's a very worthwhile thing to do for many reasons. It's something that textbooks could refer to and so forth and so on. And the reach of this could be quite extensive, right?
That's, I think, I do believe that one of the outcomes, I mean, there's a product that we have to show the National Park Service, say, here's the nomination document. the nomination document that would be written, it would be pulled together by Rich and by Gail, and then with the final sign off by a qualified archaeologist. It's part of the process. But I think that one of the things that what's happening here is that over the next 2 years, should this be funded, would start July 1st of 2022, if we do get funded, that will help nurture relationships between the Historic Preservation Commission and therefore I think the town and the Abenaki community. We cultivate a dialogue so that one of the end products may very well be a moment of the community coming together. I know that Peter Bergstrom, for example, I've heard express an interest in a need for a greater awareness and sense in the community for both the Abenaki and the Euro-American community. We come together and have a better understanding of each other. I think that will be one of the outcomes.
Yeah, it seems like it's as much about not just history as in people from the past, but it's also about the living community and better acknowledgement and representation of that community that's hasn't gone anywhere. They're still here. They've been they've been through a lot. I mean, a lot of abuse, but so a little bit of a step towards some reconciliation.
What is that correct? I mean, this is for historical relevancy. So are these kind of studies that Elijah is talking about, would that be included in your focus?
Yeah, I think that one of the outcomes will be a much fuller awareness. I mean, this is raising the petroglyph and understanding of the importance of the space, which is one of the reasons, and I want to say that Abenaki is not my native tongue, but it is the Kitsi Ponyokuk. It's a whole landscape. It's an entire place of the Great Falls. It was a place to come to fish, to hunt for habitation. There are numerous burial sites. But it's just, and that's the thing. It's just not the petroglyphs. It's this larger space that is a sacred space within the indigenous community. And I think that this is bringing that out. That would be reflected in the nomination form with the National Registry, I believe. But it would also, I think, then will filter down and become part of a conversation within the community.
Does Great River, I'm sorry, Walter. Does Great River Hydro have any statement? Who literally owns that land? Is it state property? Is it Great River Hydro?
It's very interesting. According to the town, according to the land records, the town land records, Great Falls Hydro is in fact the keeper of the land. That is, they do own the land, but they really don't. It's owned. I think and this is something. It's Congressman. I had a meeting yesterday with folks from Great River. Okay. Because in order for this to move forward, because the petroglyphs will be referenced in the National Registry, we have to have the landowner's permission to make that, to put that information on the National Registry. So we are in the process, and hopefully we'll get that letter of consent by Monday. The grant is due Tuesday. We're pulling together lots of consent letters and support letters. Great River Hydro has been very supportive, I think, with the underwriting concept. Having some concerns about just where this might be, but I think I have been convinced that it's in everyone's interest.
So what do you need from us? Do you need a motion to apply for this grant?
I think that would be in order.
Okay, and the manager signs any appropriate documents?
I'm sorry?
The manager signs any appropriate documents?
Not to my knowledge. No. What I would ask for is a letter to memorialize the support on the part of the town for the endorsement of the application.
You don't have any appropriation specifically here, Peter, so it's really more just an endorsement of the grant.
Okay, so you just need board consent to.
Consent to go
follow
forward. And that's what.
Is that the consensus of the board?
And I just want to be clear, would you write a letter of support? Do you need a letter of support from us that we could be written by the town engineer or not?
I think that that would be good to have. We do, there is an attachment section. We are getting a letter from the Vermont State Historic Preservation Office, signed off by the State Historic Preservation Officer, Laura Trishman, Jess Robinson, state archaeologist, as well as Devin Coleman, state architectural historian. They've been very supportive to helping divine just what the grant is all about. So they have submitted a letter. We're getting a letter, I believe, from the New Hampshire State Historic Preservation Office. That's in process. We have a letter from the Bellows Falls Historical Society. Should is some of this research unfold because of the proximity of some of their land to the petroglyphs, that we may end up, there's some evidence that that is an important part. So we have a letter of consent and having a letter, I think, from the town.
Okay. Then we'll go ahead with that. Well, the board consensus is to send a letter of support for the grant. Okay.
Gary has some.
Gary.
Yeah, I just want to say, we do hear clearly all of your input and interest. And as Walt is working on this project, if there's, let's say around the petroglyphs, there's improvements or protections that the indigenous, that the Abenaki would like, they're not a federally recognized tribe, so they're not eligible to apply for there's a lot of federal funds available for this type of thing. But Walter would be able to access funds that they can't because they're not federally recognized, they're local, they're regional. And so in terms of funds to do things with that, that would be, if we follow through a couple of years down the road, the plan, Walter referred to some aspects of the Iron Growth Plan. There's also in the area-wide plan, public input to have some type of Abenaki cultural center, things that honor them or walks around the island. And really important, as you folks are saying, to have an accurate narrative to tell. And what we have right now is a lot of anecdotal, not a lot of good information. So in many ways, this is really important and will lead to further access to funds and development way down the road. Although the more important piece, as Walter was pointing out, and Elijah also, is relationship building and honoring the culture. And
So this seems like the first step in all of that, relationship building and honoring the sites in the region. It's like step number one.
Okay,
All right.
let's move on to,
Thank you very much.
thanks Walter for coming in. All
If you don't mind, I'm going to go back up and get back to the grant.
right. Let's go to article, item number 5, which is the ARPA public input process. There's a sheet in your packet describing those steps.
So it was pretty obvious through the variety of different federal guidance that we received that they really wanted a robust public process before any ARPA money were spent. So Gary reached out, we did some interviews and came up with a firm to help us with a process. And so once we had put that together, we went through and looked at calendars and tried to come up with just an overall way to try to engage the public, get a sense of what projects or priorities that might be floating around that potentially we're not aware of, just because sometimes we're in our own little bubble and we don't always get the full impact of maybe what other people are thinking or feeling. So this would be a chance to reach out to some folks and try to get as wide a net possible for these monies, and then the goal here is to then work with the board and also through the joint board process to just come up with a whole host of items, proposals, recommendations, and then ultimately it's up to the board in terms of spending and priorities. But I think it's a good, it'll meet the requirements for sure of the ARPA process, but I also think it's a good way for us to engage the larger public and really get a sense of where other people are in relationship to things that might be important that we're not considering. So this is the schedule that we sort of put together. We looked at times and tried to figure out ways that are, it's hard to, especially younger families, the dinner hour can be difficult. You're asking people to come and do public participation. If you remember when you have school-age children, that, those golden hours between the end of school and bedtime are jam-packed for parents. It's not a great time. So we tried to make some accommodation for that by trying to offer some food. So at least maybe there's an incentive for people to come and try to participate and, reach the audience that maybe we miss a lot of times because they're just involved in daily activities. So that was the idea of trying to offer some food. Couple of these public engagement sessions.
Could I suggest that we add Main Street Arts to the group of organizations that in this area?
Absolutely.
Because they're key players in Saxon's River.
So I guess the goal tonight really was twofold: to bring this to the board's attention, to take a look at your own calendars in relationship to conflicts or concerns that you might have, and we're trying to schedule dates. We've already got a date in February for a public input meeting on the cannabis article. This has additional public information meetings that we're trying to schedule as well, somewhat in that time period. So I just want to make sure that the board is on board and ready to engage in the process. And if there's any other questions or concerns as we go forward. This at least gets us to the point where we have a pretty good process and a set of recommendations that will be presented, and then ultimately at our joint board meeting in May, we'll at least then have a document and a process that we can show as we go forward with real prioritization on actual spending, which is one of the things that we'll then look at and develop the next round of projects.
Scott, question, who will publicize? Will Camoin Associates be doing the publicity to make people aware of the opportunity to participate? How will we market it as it were?
So that'll be a joint process with the town and Camoin. They do have a public engagement staff, people who that's their expertise. So they'll be dedicating two staff, one who's more economic development and facilitation oriented, or project oriented, I should say. And the other staff is public engagement specialists, good with working with large groups and making the process fun and engaging. And the outreach, come up with the outreach together and do that as robustly as we can with websites and pamphlets and FAT TV and World Radio and library, our place, town hall, back everywhere that we can do outreach to merchants, the chamber.
And will there be a budget? What's going to fund this? Is it a town?
Yes.
We're going to fund it through just the general operating budget. We have some professional development funds and some other funds. So I think the goal here was to try to get this to the board so that we have enough time to, you have to spend the monies, I believe, the most recent, what is 24, I think it's the end of the fiscal year 24. So we're on a good cycle in relationship to developing this list, working through the concerns or project costs of items, and then coming up with ways that we want to then go forward to then hopefully use the money in the most beneficial way possible. so I think that's really the goal. And I think that was the goal of why they were pushing on the federal level to do as much public outreach and really document what you're doing. So I think this process will definitely keep us in good graces and that, in terms of what the federal requirements are.
Okay, now, go on to a final item on the agenda, and it's the financials in your packet. Any questions, Scott? Doesn't look like anything standing out, any other than what we've already discussed.
No, I was just a big FEMA question mark, but
Yeah.
hopefully
Yeah.
soon.
Yeah, I'll share those project worksheets with everyone once we get
So,
that next round. So just so you get a sense of what we're looking at in terms of the reimbursement, because those are fairly large numbers.
And then things are, we're good with the auditor and getting everything back on track.
Talked to them this week, and yes, so I really told her that I'd like to have their drafts done by the end of January, which gives me time then to fold it into the draft of the town report, and then have a meeting with the audit committee, and still then have time to have our meeting for the informational meeting in February, which is, I think, right now the 28th. So when I talked to them this week, they said that they should be able to meet that schedule, so I feel pretty good that we'll be okay. We won't have the rush like we had last year where audits are hot off the copier on the night of the informational meeting.
oh, I don't know, we don't have any heat, might be nice to have them hot off the car. They can sit on them, you know, and they warm.
That's fair enough.
Okay. So you think we are gonna have some semblance of an audit, probably?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good. All right, there are no bills in order, bills and warrants here to approve, so we can move along to agenda items for the January 18th. It says 16, but it's the 18th.
So I had the wrong date.
Yeah, if you want to leave it on the Saturday, that's
Oh,
fine.
shoot, it is 18th. My apologies.
Okay. We've got a couple of days for that, so if anybody thinks anything, I know it'll be the budget adoption
For sure, we'll have the warning, which we'll have to adopt.
in the morning, tax rate, et cetera, the three items that we got on here. Whatever else happens to wander its way onto the agenda. And the joint board is not until March, so
Right.
depending on who's still around at the table, we'll worry about that. Other
Gary has
business,
something.
Gary, excuse me.
Yeah, so the Vermont Community Development Program has a new form and requirements for municipal policies and codes, MP1 form that you approved a little over a year ago, or we have a light up Bellas Falls and town facilities grant. Keep trying to requisition the funds, so we need to update those forms and submit them to be eligible. So that's, so it's just, we'll have the manual available of the financial policies and a resolution that the manager, the finance director, and the select board are aware of and familiar with those policies and procedures for that financial operation.
So you're gonna bring that to the next board or?
For the 18th, yes, for the January 18th.
Hey, other business, let's start with Rick.
Nothing.
So,
Almost it.
Nope.
no. Gee whiz, this is quick. No need for an executive session, so I guess I'll take one other thing I will bring up. I do have a letter from Paul Bohosky announcing his resignation effective February 28th, 2022, but we all knew that at that time, but it's officially down on paper, so.
Tried to talk him out of it.
It didn't work.
Was
Yeah,
not
well.
successful.
That golf course is calling.
Exactly.
Yes, I think a lot of things are calling. Yeah.
That being said, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
motion's been seconded to adjourn. All those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
We're done, folks. Apologize again for the delay this morning, today. Nice progress.
Cranky owl.